Hi. Introducing you to Food Safety, Level 2. Personal Hygiene. Lesson 1. Food workers have a moral and legal responsibility to ensure that they do not contaminate food. One of the characteristics of a good food worker is a positive attitude towards hygiene and a willingness to help maintain a high standard in the workplace. It is off-putting for customers to observe those handling or serving the food they are about to eat if the staff member shows little regard for his or her personal hygiene standards. On the other hand, a clean appearance creates a good impression. Food hygiene legislation places a legal responsibility on food workers, proprietors, and visitors to maintain a high degree of personal cleanliness. They should wear suitable clean clothes, and, if necessary, protective clothing. Food workers should wash or shower daily to remove the layers of dirt, dead skin, sweat and bacteria that build upon the body, which are passed on to food. It is an offense for an employee of a food business to fail to comply with food safety rules. Personal hygiene when working with food involves keeping yourself clean and tidy when working with food, including the hair and especially the hands. Food workers must not wear long nails, they are hard to keep clean and break easily. Nail varnish hides dirt and chips off. Watches and jewelry hold dirt, harbor bacteria and stones etc., may fall off. Perfume and aftershave, it may taint food. Avoiding unhygienic habits. Smoking as it causes contamination of the fingers by hand-to-mouth contact. Ash and butts may fall into food. It is illegal. Coughing or sneezing over food. Nail biting may fall into food. Contamination of the fingers by hand-to-mouth contact. Nose picking. Finger tasting or wetting fingers to open bags etc. Personal hygiene checklist. Cover cuts and sores with brightly colored waterproof dressings. Remove jewelry. Put on clean protective outer clothing and tie back hair and put on a hairnet where necessary. Washing your hands regularly throughout the work period. Always wash your hands when they are likely to be contaminated, for instance after going to the toilet or after handling raw meat or poultry. Recognize good personal hygiene practices. Food workers are legally obliged to wash their hands after visiting the toilet. Toilet paper is porous and can cause the hands to become contaminated with dangerous bacteria, even when soiling on hands is not visible. Forearms should also be washed if they are uncovered while at work. It is also necessary to wash hands before starting work. Handling food, especially if cooked or ready to eat. Changing from one job to another. Handling raw meat and vegetables. Sneezing, coughing, blowing nose. Touching eyes, nose, face, hair, mouth, cuts. Smoking, coffee and lunch breaks. Cleaning duties, handling money, handling waste items. Hands must be washed at a wash hand basin, supplied with running hot and cold water. Liquid bacterial soap and an approved means of hand drying should be used, such as disposable paper towels. The hands, front and back, and the gap between the thumb and forefinger, must be washed using a rubbing action. Use comfortably hot water, rub your hands vigorously to work in the soap. Don't forget the areas in between your fingers and around your wrists. Rinse your hands before drying them. It is not satisfactory to run fingers under the tap, and then to dry hands on uniforms. Hands should be thoroughly dried. Protective clothing. What properties make clothing suitable as a uniform for a food worker? It must incorporate a suitable hat or cap, and hairnet, shielding all hair. It must be pale in color so that any dirt is visible. It must be washable. It must have no external pockets. Where possible, use disposable gloves which diminishes direct contact with food. Do we wear protective clothing to protect us from the food, or is it to shield the food from us? Your own clothing can carry dangerous bacteria. Clean protective clothing should be worn by food workers to shield the food from contamination. It further extends personal protection from burns and additional injuries. Never wear protective clothing outside the place you work. This must be put on in the staff cloakroom before work begins. Long hair must be confined in a suitable item of headwear. Food handlers should always wear a hat or cap which adequately covers the hair. Beards must be kept trimmed or covered. The health of food workers. Food workers must be in good health. Where there is any chance of contaminating food with bacteria as a result of an illness, working in a food handling area is forbidden. If employees are suffering from diarrhea or vomiting, have a skin infection such as boils, septic cuts, styes etc., are suffering from hepatitis, or if they are suffering from an infectious disease, they must report it to their supervisor. It is also recommended that if a food worker is in contact with an individual suffering from an infectious disease, their supervisor should be notified. Supervisors have a legal responsibility to ensure that a food worker who is suffering from, or is a probable source of infection with an infectious disease, does not perform any work in connection with the food business. Food workers suffering from an infectious disease must be excluded from the food area. These infectious diseases include food poisoning, dysentery, salmonella infection, scarlet fever, streptococcal, sore throat, typhoid, TB, diphtheria, polio, paratyphoid A and B. There is a legal responsibility on the food worker to inform his or her employer if suffering from an infectious disease. If food workers have suffered any food illness while abroad, even if they have recovered, their employer must be informed upon return. Staff can be legally required to complete a medical questionnaire prior to employment, which should then be kept on file. Food handlers should inform their supervisor if they have any cuts or sores, and these should be fully covered with a brightly colored waterproof dressing. Cuts and sores can carry harmful bacteria. Covering them prevents bacteria from reaching food. Colored waterproof dressings can be seen more readily if they fall into food. You could be a carrier of harmful bacteria and be completely unaware. Carriers are persons who harbor harmful bacteria, and may pass them on while having no signs of illness themselves. You could become infected without feeling sick at any time. People who are recuperating from illness, such as salmonella food poisoning, could be carriers for several months. You could be a carrier of food poisoning bacteria. Examples: Clostridium perfringens, Escherichia coli, and Salmonella in the intestines. Staphylococcus aureus, in our hands, hair, ears, nose, mouth, throat, in septic cuts, spots and boils. Food poisoning bacteria. Foodborne pathogens are more inclined to create infection, resulting in severe consequences in vulnerable people than in healthy adults. Vulnerable people may form nearly 20% of the population in the UK and the USA. Figures suggest Africa has the highest burden of foodborne diseases, relative to its population. More than 91 million people are estimated to fall ill, and 137,000 die each year. Although having the second highest relative burden of foodborne diseases, Southeast Asia suffers the most, with more than 150 million cases and 175,000 deaths a year. Vulnerable people include those with the following: immunosuppressive drugs in organ transplantation, leukemia, HIV/AIDS, chemotherapy for cancer, radiotherapy for cancer, treatment with corticosteroids, anti-inflammatory medicines, treatment with inhibitors of tumor necrosis factor, for example for rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, diabetes, primary and secondary, pregnancy, age under 5 years. People who handle food become the most significant hazard in spreading contamination to food. Good personal hygiene is essential to ensure you do not cause others to become ill after eating food you have touched. Follow all company rules on personal hygiene. Notify your supervisor if you are or have been ill.